You have a job when you go to play golf. And the job is to do only two things, because there's only two things that your conscious mind actually can control with any kind of consistency on the golf course, which are your focal point and doing each step of your pre-shot routine to the best of your ability. And of course, that's assuming you've trained yourself to have an effective routine.
Hi, this is Jerry Moore from Texarkana, Texas, and I play at Texarkana Golf Ranch. This is Golf Smarter number 869.
What catches a teaching pro's attention when working with a new student? With our old friend, Jim Waldron.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to the Golf Smarter Podcast, Jimmy.
Thank you, Fred. I always enjoy being with you and hanging with you.
Well, you know, it's so funny because here we are. We finally get to do one on video on this platform I use called Riverside FM. And just to let the audience know, so it's taken us 35 minutes to get you logged in today. And it's the first time in, I think, 6 tries that we've even been able to get you to log in. For some reason, it's the hardest thing to get you to do this. So that's why a lot of our conversations ends up being on the phone, because we either get so frustrated and just hang up or just say, we have to reschedule this. We've had a lot of
2 hours we wasted trying to get it to work.
We've had a lot of time that we've spent trying to just connect so we can record something, but we're here. So let's just get to it already. My goodness. Let's just pretend I'm a first-time student with Jim Waldron at Balance Point Golf. And I'm coming in and saying, look, I've been playing for a couple of years. I'm scoring in the 90s now. I started, I've been able to break 100 and I'm getting into the low 90s. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. You're in charge, Jim Waldron. What happens next?
Okay, because we have time constraint, because this could be a 12-hour podcast, we're going to assume that you want to work on your mental game, because that's on the list, as opposed to swing mechanics or short game or putting mechanics, right?
Well, is that where we should start, is on the mental game? Is that what's holding me back?
It all depends on the student. So if you were a real student, it would take me probably 30 minutes of asking you questions and you responding before we would come up with which of the 4 major skill areas to dial in on, which are full swing mechanics, short game mechanics, putting mechanics, and then mental game. Those are the 4 skill areas in general, big picture. So let's assume of those 4, that's the one that you and I decide would be your best thing to start with.
And what made you determine that mental game is where we should go? I mean, what are the things that I've said that clue you in that mental game is probably where I need the most work?
There's several clues, but the biggest clue is someone who tells me I'm hitting it reasonably well. Let's say like you said, you're a 90 shooter, and the 90 shooter student says, I'm hitting it reasonably well. In fact, all my buddies, including guys I play with who are single-digit handicaps, tell me I have an 8 handicap ball striking experience on the range, but then when I walk on the golf course on the first tee, I'm like a 16 or 17. Mm-hmm. So why is that? And that's always a tell. That means your mental game is poor.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that before. You've got a 6 handicap swing, and it's your setup, though.
Exactly. So that's fairly common. I mean, I would say if someone comes to me shooting, say, right around 90 in that 16 to 18 handicap range, probably 1/3 of those guys or gals we're going to decide to start with mental game, and the other 2/3 will start with mechanics.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of things are you going to ask me about the mental game?
All right. So what I would say is the following. There's a bullet point checklist I go through, and I'm going to go through it much more quickly because of the time constraints.
Sure.
But there's several of them. And I tell the person, look, for you to have an understanding of how to use the mental game principles that I teach, you need to have a little bit of theory, and some of this will be new to you. I've only had a handful of students at the end of this question and answer period say, yeah, I already knew all that stuff.
Okay.
These are sort of in order of importance, right? So the first one is called the principle of the mind-body connection, which I know you and I and a bunch of other people you've talked with in the last 15 years have talked about that a lot, which is in Western culture, starting with the Greeks, there's a philosophical concept that seeped into the general culture called mind-body disconnect, which basically says, or also known as mind-body dualism, which is that we have a mental part of our experience, and then we have a physical part, and they're separate. There's like a firewall between them. And of course, that's not true. From what we know from science, particularly modern neuroscience, is the truth is the polar opposite. Anytime you change your consciousness, instantly your physiology changes. And conversely, anytime you change your body, your physiology, it affects your consciousness. So consciousness and physical experience or physical manifestation of a movement pattern like the golf swing are inextricably linked together. They're not separate, right? The second principle is the principle of the two minds, which you and I have also talked about a bunch, which means, and in general, most people know this one. This isn't considered, out there or esoteric. But we have an unconscious mind, meaning we have a psychological aspect of how our brain functions that's literally beneath consciousness. And that can have an influence on our behavior, our physical behavior and our psychological behavior. We also have a conscious mind or consciousness, which is a separate aspect of human experience. And those two things need to have a relationship. You're basically, in terms of making any type of a behavioral change, you want your conscious mind and your unconscious mind to be on the same page, to working together as a team, not in opposition to each other. And one of the classic examples of being in opposition to each other, it's the most severe example, is a golfer with severe yips, right? And that's one reason I've been successful helping people with yips is I get their conscious mind and their unconscious to stop going to war with each other. So they have to be on a team, right? The third principle is called the principle of the two worlds, which is, again, this is one of those things when I explain it, it'll seem obvious, but it's so hidden in the background, so to speak. It's so obviously true. It's like that old metaphor of a fish is born in water, it lives its life in the ocean, and it dies in the ocean. So the water's so omnipresent that you don't really pay attention to it, right? And the two worlds are, first, the physical world that science, particularly physics, studies, which is that we live in a three-dimensional, spatial dimensional universe, plus time, the fourth dimension. So that's a real world that science studies. But we all have our own individual psychological, private psychological space. So there's a Fred Green psychological space, there's a Jim Waldron psychological space that nobody else has access to. And that means everything that you experience in that space would fall under the following categories: memories of the past, hopes and fantasies of the future, your moral and ethical beliefs, your beliefs about yourself, what you feel you're capable of doing well, what you feel you're not capable of doing well, all of your personal emotional experiences, your imagination, your perceptions, all that stuff comprises this bubble. Think of it like a virtual reality space.
Right.
Right. And that's the psychological space. And then there's a third element to this. It's not considered a third world, but there's an element of our experience that interacts with both the physical world and our internal psychological world, which is the fourth bullet point, which is consciousness. Consciousness is always present unless you're in delta or theta wave sleep when you're sleeping at night, in which case it completely switches off. When you're dreaming in rapid eye movement, so-called REM sleep, there's still dreaming consciousness. You're still having an experience. So whenever you're experiencing something, either the internal psychological world or the external physical world, consciousness is activated. And the best analogy for consciousness is a flashlight beam. If you walk into a dark room and there's a power outage, and I hand you a flashlight, and as soon as you press the on button, the beam of light illuminates the dark room, and you start to see objects for what they are. So the nature of consciousness is it's enlightening, right?
Okay.
But there's different types of consciousness. In my system, there's two basic types, which are called normal consciousness or baseline consciousness versus advanced consciousness. Yeah. And there's different perceptual filters, which is coming up here in a future bullet point in a few minutes from now. So our consciousness can experience either of the two worlds, your internal psychological world, or it can focus on the external world. And it can flip back and forth. So it can focus externally on a tree over there or a car or another person, or it can turn inward on yourself and focus on your internal psychological space. And throughout the day, it flits back and forth, right? All right. So at this point, again, this is a speeded up version for those who are listening and watching. So Fred, any questions so far?
Yes. Can we take a break here?
Yes.
Okay. We'll be back right after this. Okay. Yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
A moment ago, you asked me about it, where you said it's what you believe you can do or what you believe you can't do.
Right.
And I think that in my golf swing, when there's ever a shred of doubt, when doubt enters my mind at all,
Mm-hmm.
it affects my golf swing. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. And that would affect anything off the golf course as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to explain this, and one I often use as a teaching parable, is the firewalking stuff that was popular in the 90s, mainly started with Tony Robbins.
Okay.
Some of you listening and watching have probably done it or heard about people who've done it. And here's what we know. About 80% of the people who attend a weekend seminar, which is mainly about confidence building, which is another way of saying elimination of doubt about your ability to believe you can accomplish a task.
Right.
So they do, they do if you do like a weekend firewalking seminar, the first day has nothing to do with firewalking. It's all about what we're talking about now, how to have better control over your conscious state, over your conscious mind, right? And then they talk a lot more about what happens when you walk across the hot coals. Now, 80% of the people walk across the hot coals, which is about 10 feet long, and they don't suffer any damage to their bottom of their feet at all. And about 20% do. But the 20% that do get a slight burn on the bottom of their feet, think of a severe sunburn.
Oh.
The reason why they do is they walk a little bit slower than the people who walk fast, than the people who don't get any burns. In other words, the people who don't get any burns have already formed the belief, I can do this without burning my feet. And because they're confident, they walk quickly, meaning no flinching, no muscles tightening up. Right. But the people who haven't quite got into the belief system yet that they're fully capable of walking across the coals without burning themselves, the people who have doubt, they walk a little bit more slowly, the 10 feet. So their bottom of their foot is staying in contact with their coals for a fraction of a second longer, causing the slight burn.
But that's that's kind of opposite of golf, because when things aren't going well in golf, we tend to speed up, right?
Right, but I'm just giving an example of what causes the burn. The reason their foot is staying in contact with their coals for maybe like a 25th of a second longer, that's all it takes to cause the burn. The reason why they're not walking as fast as they should be walking is because they have the doubt in their mind. They don't have the confidence, which causes muscles to tighten up. Muscles tightening up is the stress response, which is fight or flight or freeze. And the term for freezing in golf, if you're not an outright yipster, is flinch. And so I've been saying for 35 years that the average golfer, especially people who are mid to high handicaps, on every swing, pretty much when they play golf, they're flinching. That's if you're in that sort of 10 handicap range or higher, somewhere between 90 and 100% of your swings or your putting strokes or your short game strokes you're flinching. In other words, a muscle, one or more muscles is tightening up due to improper use of the mind. When the mind has, for example, like you gave, doubt causes a flinch, right? Yeah. So it's possible to learn how to control your conscious mind and use it as a tool, the way you use the golf ball, the golf club in your body. In traditional golf teaching, there's only 3 tools: the ball, the club in your hand, and your body. And in my method, there's a fourth tool, which is to learn how to use your conscious mind as a tool, to have a measure of control over it. Yeah.
Right. Well, we've been talking a lot lately on the show about external focus and not focusing on your body parts, on your swing mechanics, things like that, but focusing on things outside of yourself.
Right. Correct.
And is this all, and it's worked tremendously well for me, except my last couple rounds, I have noticed some doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impacted my game.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I went to Arizona and played 4 days in a row. And the first day I shot 91, and it's the first time in a long time I've shot in the 90s. And I didn't know what was going on until I realized that day, when my buddies and I got together, we always exchanged gifts. And one of the gifts that was given to us was a couple sleeves of Pro V1s. Well, I play Pro V1X, and I have been exclusively playing Pro V1X for almost a decade now, and have a lot of confidence in the ball. And that day that I shot the 91, I played Pro V1s.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it's always been that when I've tried Pro V1s, because living next to a golf course, I get a lot of Pro V1s in my backyard. Yeah. It just doesn't have, I don't know what the difference of the two balls is, but my swing, my game tends to be better with the Pro V1X.
Yeah. If I remember right, talked about, I think the X has a little bit softer cover, provides more. I think X means extra spin, I believe, compared to the regular Pro V. Yeah. But that was in your head, which obviously affected your performance, right? No,
it wasn't, because I was like, okay, I'm all in on the Pro V1s. I'm going to play the Pro V1s, and didn't think about it. And that was just the other day, a week and a half after the trip, that I realized, oh, that round is one that I played with the Pro V1s.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I'll blame it on the ball.
Yeah, that's what Lee Trevino would do. I had a chance a couple times to spend time on the range down in PGA West practicing with Lee, and I talked to his caddy, Herman. I said, what does Lee do in the golf course when he hits a bad shot? He goes, he never takes any responsibility for it. I go, what are you talking about? He goes,
wow.
Blame me. He'll say, oh, Herman, you sneezed in the middle of my backswing, or someone in the gallery clicked a phone. But all right, ready for the next bullet point? This is a
well. What's
one.
Interesting is I have a friend who has a reason for every golf shot, and he drives me kind of nuts. It's like every golf shot's got, well, I didn't do this. I lifted my head. Oh, I didn't follow through. It's like, it's golf, man. Things aren't going to be exact every single time.
Exactly. All right. This next bullet point is the one I really want to spend time talking, because we haven't really gone into this, but although I did listen to you and Joe Parent the other day, and he talked a little bit about this, which I thought was really cool, by the way. I don't know if you know that he and I went to the same Buddhist teacher back in the early 70s in Boulder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Where we studied Tibetan Buddhism.
So then you heard the segment with the Zen Buddhist monk that I met in Japan. And
I didn't hear that one yet, but it's on my list of things, because I know you sent it to me, but I didn't hear the whole podcast. I skipped around.
Oh, listen to the whole thing. You'll hear that conversation where the Zen Buddhist monk in Japan, who we were meditating with, talked about Joe Parent's book. It's like,
that's great.
Yeah. He talked about how he read it, because we were talking about moving meditation versus sitting meditation.
Yeah.
And he talked about moving meditation, and he brought up the Zen of Golfing, that he thought that was the name of the book, but maybe in Japanese it translated to the Zen of Golfing. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anyhow, this principle has to do with understanding, which is one of the first things they teach you in Buddhism, particularly Buddhist practice centered on meditation or mindfulness, which is that what is the nature of the conscious mind? And the nature of the conscious mind, according to Buddhists, and anybody who meditates for 5 minutes will experience this immediately. There's a few qualities to it that you have to realize. The first quality is it's more of a potential than an actual reality. Potentially, you can train your conscious mind to, like I said earlier, you can use it as a reliable tool, potentially. But actually, the nature of the conscious mind that hasn't been trained is a mind in chaos. It's a mind that randomly flits from focus to focus, from focus point to next focus point to the next focus point, meaning it doesn't have a natural state of stability or calmness. It's a mind in chaos. This is one of the first early principles of Buddhist practice you learn. And the point is, how could you use a tool that's chaotic? And the analogy I use as a teaching story is, imagine that you have a hammer. You're going to do a carpentry project, and you got this hammer. But the hammer has a mind of its own. And when you reach for the hammer, it moves away. It goes up in the sky, up toward the ceiling. So now you have to get the step ladder out. It's up on it, and you go to grab it, and then it moves away. So it's constantly moving away from you, and it's hard to get your hands on the hammer and actually use it as a tool. That's kind of what the nature of normal, untrained conscious mind is like, right?
Wow.
So the second principle in Buddhism, how do you create order or calmness or clear mind out of chaos? And the answer is, we're born with the potential to take this chaotic, almost like being inside a tornado or a vortex. So you got to start inside this tornado and somehow calm down the wind. So the analogy would be, you've got an old piece of rope and a tent stake. So you drive the tent stake, the anchor, into the ground, and you tie the rope around it, and you hold on to it. And that's early stage mindfulness or meditation practice. That little stake, right? You have to find a wedge. You have to get your foot in the door in this tornado of chaos through mindfulness practice. Yeah. And in Buddhist tradition, there's two main types of practice. That's the first one. That's called samatha, which means to focus your mind extremely narrowly. Technically, the English translation would be concentration. So before you can get to the more advanced stages of mindfulness practice, which is a big mind that's empty or quiet or calm, you have to start with this vortex of chaos and create some stability by focusing on just one thing, which gets to the next bullet point, which is your mind, your consciousness. That flashlight beam has three functional sizes, which are narrow, like a laser beam, really small, medium wide, and super wide. Super wide, Joe's teacher and I called panoramic awareness, right? Which means 360. I also call that hunter's consciousness, because when you're hunting deer in the mountains, the deer could be anywhere, right?
Sure. Now, before you go to the other two beams, we need to take another break. We'll be back. All right, let's get back to the three beams of light in your bullet points.
Yeah. Think of a modern day, like a mag light. You can twist the bezel, the lens, and make it wide, super wide, kind of medium wide, and then narrow. So think in 3D space, you got 360 degrees on the circle. You've got a semicircle, which is the medium wide, and you got one dot, 1 point on the compass. That's narrow. So in samatha or concentration practice, you focus your mind on just one thing. And when you're focusing your mind on that one thing, you do it without any emotional investment. I see a lot of golfers, when they first learn my focal point system, they are in narrow mode, but they're like this. They're grinding their teeth or holding their breath, and they think that's concentration. And it's not. Concentration has nothing to do with emotions or holding your breath or tightening muscles. It's a mental thing. It's simply directing the flashlight beam over there and holding it there. In the case of the golf swing, you acquire your focal point, the thing you're going to direct your consciousness beam of light at, so to speak, about 3 to 5 seconds before you trigger your takeaway. And you keep that beam of light, that consciousness, let's say it's grip pressure. You keep your mind on your grip pressure all the way to the finish. So for about 4 to 5 seconds, because the swing takes 1.5 seconds start to finish, for 4 or 5 seconds when you play golf, you have to keep your mind in narrow mode, in this case on grip pressure. Another way to explain it is, imagine my focal point is going to be the cap on the end of my pen. When I'm in narrow mode, I make my mind just big enough to fit, just enough space for the cap of the pen to fit, and not any bigger. As soon as my mind relaxes and goes like that in the medium wide, or even bigger in the super wide, I let negative thoughts and emotions come into my psychological space, which can then trigger a garden variety flinch, or in severe cases, a yip. So the goal is to make your swing or your stroke flinch proof and yip proof. You have to stay in narrow mode, right? And not let your mind get bigger. And when you're under stress, your mind instantly goes to super wide mode because the tiger could come from anywhere and kill you.
Okay, so wait a minute. Now you've talked about the focus being on the grip. That's internal focus, and that creates pressure and tension, doesn't it? Wait a minute, you lost me on that.
No, it's okay. I'm not a fan of internal, external. I think there's a lot of confusion about what those topics mean. In other words, when we go to the next bullet point, why don't we just do that and I'll answer the question then. But basically,
okay,
you can focus on your body, but if you do it in field channel, it's done in first person. So, all right, the next bullet point then would be there's 3 psychological perspectives, which has to do how basically the neurolinguistic structure of the brain, how language codes the brain, and how the brain uses language is a really big deal. In fact, the great philosopher and political activist Noam Chomsky, he's the world's leading expert on this, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, it shows in grammar. So in grammar, we have first person, I say, second person, he said, third person, they said. Your experience of being in the world psychologically also has those 3 perspectives. So when you're in first person, you have mind-body connection. When you're in second person, which is first order dissociation in psychology, there's 2 people, there's 2 Freds in there. There's the Fred who's got the bad golf swing with over the top that Fred, we'll call that Fred number 2, and there's Fred number 1, who's the internal golf teacher, right? That's a split. Anytime there's 2 people in there, that's not good.
Right.
You would call that being internal. But it's possible to not have 2 people, to only have 1 Fred swinging the golf club, but still focusing on your body. But that means you're focusing on your body through direct perception of your muscles, through using your sensory nerves, what we call field channel, right? So when you're drifting, for example, people who have performance anxiety with a golf club in their hand will tell me, particularly people who have yips, it's very common. Most people who have yips also have performance anxiety as one of the triggers. When they walk on the first tee and they're setting up to the ball, in their imagination, obviously this isn't really happening, but in their imagination, they imagine they're watching themselves screw up their swing from the standpoint of their playing partners standing 10 feet behind them. Sure. And anybody who has stage fright, who has difficulty with public speaking, they see themselves from the point of view of the audience failing to perform their speech properly. So that's dissociation, right? Dissociation doesn't work in sports, but primarily sports that have complex movement patterns like the golf swing, because the more complicated the motion, the stronger the mind-body connection you need to have, the more you have to function from first person. So for example, right now, I'll put my mind in the bottom of my left foot, which is pressing on the footrest on my stool. And I can feel sensations coming from those sensory nerves in the bottom of my foot into consciousness. And I can keep it there for as long as I want without my mind wandering off. I'm not external, but I'm not really technically internal. In other words, internal, the way that phrase has been used, means you're in a dissociated state. There's you looking at your body from an external point of view, looking back on it, right? And trying to make it do something. But what I'm talking about is when you're in field channel in what's called passive mode, there's also active mode. When you're in passive mode, passively observing your grip pressure in feel, many, many tournaments have been won with the golfer doing that, right? So it doesn't have to be external in the sense that you're focusing on the target picture in visual channel or telling yourself a nonsense phrase like we talked about last time, like easy peasy, lemon squeezy, like Natalie Gulbis did in the voice channel, right? You can focus on your body. In my system, there's 5 categories. The second one's called the body. But the vast majority of those body category focal points are done in feel. But this is another exercise I was looking forward to doing with you today. So do you want to try it? It's called the 3 sensory channels exercise.
Oh, all right. Well, let's take one more quick break and we'll come back and do the 3 sensory things. We'll be back right after this. This week on Golf Smarter Mulligans, our golf sensei, Jamie Zimron, joins us to discuss getting centered in our minds and with our balance for each shot.
One of the best ways to, number 1, enjoy golf more, and number 2, really lower your scores, is to have a much more consistent, centered contact on the golf ball. And that's true from a putt to a chip to a full swing. And if you're in that kind of centered presence and control in your body and in your golf swing, you are going to dramatically up your percentage of centered golf shots, of sweet spot contact. When that happens, you're making a lot more good shots. Your misses aren't so bad, and you're able to stay more centered in a physical, emotional, and mental sense, so your mental game's getting better. And you're in a much better position to really improve your golf game than when you're tweaking this and tweaking that and trying to figure this out and trying to change this and that and just making random centered balanced swings.
That's Golf Smarter Mulligans, episode 185, recorded and published in 2011, featuring Jamie Zimron of Ki Golf. From the archives of Golf Smarter that are no longer available, please subscribe for free to our sister podcast that revisits the best of the Golf Smarter podcast called Golf Smarter Mulligans, being released every Friday from wherever you're listening right now. All right, bring it on. Let's do it.
Okay, man. So here's what I'll have you do. Put your hand on your shoulder.
Put my left hand on my right shoulder.
Yep. Turn your head and look at it for about 5 seconds. Okay. That's your external visual channel. That means your brain is processing information about the real physical world, in this case, your hand, through your eyeballs. Now look at me. Keep your hand there. Close your eyes, Fred. Tell me if you can imagine or picture your hand on your shoulder.
Yes.
Yes. That's your internal visual channel, which is one of two ways we can think. We can see internal visual images, including when we're dreaming at night, right? But even during waking moments, we can picture stuff. They can be moving images like an actual movie, or they can be still images like a photo. Okay, that's the first channel. The second channel is called the auditory or the voice channel. So say out loud, my hand is touching my shoulder. Keep your hand up there.
My hand is touching my shoulder.
That's your external auditory. That means you made sonic or acoustic vibrations using the muscles in your mouth that your ears picked up. Anytime you pick up acoustic or sonic input from the real world, the physical world, the external world, you're an external auditory channel. Now, close your eyes and say that same sentence, my hand's touching my shoulder, inside in your mind, and then nod your head when you hear the voice in your head say that sentence. Okay, that's your internal auditory, also known as the voice channel. And that's the second way we can think. We can use language to think about things, right? Okay, the third sensory channel is kinesthetic or feel channel. So I want you to pulse your fingers on your shoulder pretty firmly with your eyes closed and tell me when you can feel the sensation.
I'm giving myself a massage here.
Can you feel it?
Yep.
Okay, is there also a picture or is it 100% feel?
Oh, I'm getting both.
Okay. I want you to let the picture go by focusing 100% of your mind in field channels. Just only focus on the sensations, and then tell me when you're there.
Okay, I'm there.
Okay, so there was no voice either. So you weren't saying anything in your head, right?
Correct.
Just pure sensation. Okay, so you're in one channel. Now, from a narrow focus standpoint, you can only be in any given moment in time. You can only be in one of those three primary sensory channels. By the way, there are obviously two other channels, which are smell and taste, which we're not going to count, right? Because we don't use them that often throughout the day.
Right.
So when you're in narrow focus mode, it means focusing small, keeping your mind small in only one of those three channels and on only one thing. And that one thing is called the focal point. In this case, the focal point was the sensation coming from your shoulder muscle when you were squeezing it. Yeah. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Now, if you had been in voice channel saying, right now my hand is touching my shoulder, that would be considered an internal focus. Or if you were picturing it, that would be considered an internal focus, which could trigger a flinch or a yip. But when you're in field channel, which is direct perception, using the sensory nerves, your mind, that problem with focusing on the body goes away. Right? In other words, when you're picturing yourself touching your shoulder, you created a representational image in your mind of your hand touching your shoulder. A symbol is not the same thing as the reality it points to. When you use language to describe the experience by saying my hand is touching my shoulder, that's verbal symbolic representation. And one of the cool things that the Buddhists discovered 2,500 years ago is that the only way you can have the actual objective, accurate perception of your body is in field channel. You cannot have accurate perception of your body in either the visual channel or the voice channel, because you're paying attention to a symbol. You're not paying attention to what your body's actually doing, right? So the opportunity for self-delusion among golfers is manifestly high, because most golfers don't know what I just showed you. They don't know about the 3 sensory channels. And they certainly, even if they know it intellectually, they certainly haven't done the practice, I'm talking the vast majority of golfers, to have a measure of control over it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it brings up questions for me about turning it on and off. And am I doing the same one with every golf shot?
The basic idea is, in my system, once you learn what the 5 categories are, which we can talk about in a minute, you're going to test all of them. It takes, might take you 5 or 6 range sessions of 2 or 3 hours per session to be done, because there's about 50 of them. But at the end of your testing, you'll have a list, and I want you to have at least 4 proven, tested, effective focal points that you use. Now, it's not uncommon at all to have a category just for driver, for example, and a second category for all your other long game clubs, a third category for short game, a fourth for putting, and even a fifth for greenside bunker shots, because those are, obviously, there's some differences between those type of shots. In fact, most good players that I've worked with, 5 handicaps or better, will have those 5 categories. And what I do is when I get to the golf course, I write them down. Like today's round, I'm going to focus on target picture with the driver. So I'll put down TP equals DG, D for driver game. I'll put down tempo for LG. So all the other long game clubs, I'm going to focus on tempo, which would be, my version of it is to say 1 in my voice channel on the backswing, 1, 1, which is what Annika Sorenstam told me. She was successful a lot of times on LPGA. I forget how many times she won using tempo. So it's 1, 1. On putting, I'll do, say, grip pressure and feel. On greenside bunker shots, I'll do squeezing the inside of my upper thighs together in field channel, right? In short game, it'll be the landing spot in internal visual. So I'll picture my landing spot in my internal visual channel. So I'm using these 3 sensory channels, visual, voice, and feel, and I'm associating a single focal point in each of those 3 sensory channels for the task at hand. So it's extremely precise. It's no more guesswork, no more randomness. You have a job when you go to play golf, and the job is to do only 2 things, because there's only 2 things that your conscious mind actually can control with any kind of consistency on the golf course, which are your focal point and doing each step of your pre-shot routine to the best of your ability. Now, of course, that's assuming you've trained yourself to have an effective routine.
Right.
But when I play, that's all I do. I just do the steps of my routine in the present moment. A few seconds before I start my takeaway, I focus my mind. Again, let's say it's going to be target picture. And I keep my mind on target picture till I get to the finish. And that's all I'm trying to do with my conscious mind. I'm not trying to shoot a low score. I'm not trying to fix my swing flaws. I'm not worrying about the fact that I double bogeyed the last hole. I'm not worried about what my playing partners are thinking about my performance. None of that crap is in my head at all. So it's a very simple, clear, precise way to play.
Amazing. This is so powerful, this stuff. But it's, there's so much. I'm so glad it's a podcast that we can go over it and listen to it multiple times, because you just gave us a lot. Obviously, you said it could have been a 12-hour podcast and you condensed it all into one conversation, but it was phenomenal. You've been having Golf Smarter listeners reach out to you, haven't you?
The last year, especially, I'm getting a lot of referrals from this podcast. So thank you, Fred.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to hear that, and
I think I told you I had 4 within 2 days, like a week ago.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. That's really remarkable. And so how can people get in touch with you so that they can reach out as well? And where are you going to be in the end of 2022 and into 2023?
I'm going to be in Mexico November 14th until about right before Christmas. And I will be doing a little teaching.
Where in Mexico?
Puerto Vallarta.
Okay.
And then I'll be back in Hawaii from about March 25th till about April 15th. Back on Oahu at Ko'olina Golf Club, where I've been teaching for, this will be my 17th year in a row there. And then I go back to Portland, where you and I were together at Quail Valley Golf Course, and from mid-May. And that's where I'll be until mid-October.
Okay. And find you online is balancepointgolf.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Always an incredible wealth of information and excitement and fun when we get together. Once we can connect these phone lines, get you online.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to get you more equipment or something. We're gonna have to figure out how to do this so it's a prettier picture. But at least we got to do it today. So thank you again, as always, for your expertise and your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred. Look forward to the next time for sure.
I don't know what it is about Jim, but as we were talking about at the head of the episode, every time we've recorded over the last few years, there's been some technical snafu. I mean, I've recorded hundreds of sessions for Golf Smarter and the other podcasts that I produce, and Jim is the only person who consistently cannot connect to our platform. And most of the time, we'll spend 30 to 45 minutes just getting them hooked up properly so that we can conduct the interview. But the good news is that we didn't have to record via phone lines this time, and that we still get a good dose of golf instruction brilliance from Jim. I truly enjoy having him on. Now, if someone would have techno yips, of course it would have to be Jim Waldron, right? The Yoda of yips, the yips whisperer. But technology doesn't connect with this guy. So even though we didn't capture the complete interview to place on YouTube, I was able to place a video promo on social media and youtube.com/@GolfSmarter so you can catch a glimpse of me and Jim in conversation. I want to thank Jerry Moore of Texarkana, Texas, our latest Golf Smarter ambassador. So this list of ambassadors who've stepped up to open our episode continues to grow. And over the next few months, I'll be sending out some email blasts with exclusive Golf Smarter offers. But it's only going out to this select group of engaged listeners who've participated. So come on, take advantage of receiving a gift for leaving a short voicemail. Please write in and let me know that you'd also like to open the episode and be on that short list of special offers. Plus, for your effort, you'll also have a choice of a new glove and glove storage compartment from redroostergolf.com or Tony Manzoni's Lost Fundamental video. Please send an email and I'll get back to you with some simple instructions. Just write to golfsmarterpodcast@gmail.com or, of course, clicking on the Hey Fred button at our website, golfsmarter.com. So, did you get a chance to play this past weekend? How'd you do? You know, I actually enjoy hearing about your latest round, so feel free to write to me with an update. Now, I had one of those strange rounds on Sunday that I'd like to forget, but they happen, and the best I can do is learn from it. Could I say I learned from my mistakes? But I'm not really sure that's exactly what happened. Okay, my putts weren't dropping, which was frustrating and accounted for probably 4 or 5 more strokes than I'd like to report. But here's what was really crazy. My driver was the best club in the bag that day. According to my scoring app, I used the Grint, I hit 85% of the fairways. 85% of the fairways, and that is in counting the par threes, right? That they don't really count the fairways. And that would usually put me in a position for a significant number of pars. But my iron play was completely baffling. You know, I only hit 11% of greens in regulation. And I ended up in 8 bunkers, including 5 in a row, greenside bunkers from 9 through 13. Yeah, holes 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 ended up in the bunker on all of those. All I could do was laugh and shake my head and read more mental game books. Actually, next week, we're going to speak to Dr. Saul Miller, author of Winning Golf, The Mental Game. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for upcoming episodes, or you want to report back to me on how your round is going, please click on the Hey Fred button at GolfSmarter.com.